Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Net Zero Carbon. I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Economist here at FreightWaves, and I have the honor to be joined by someone who is no stranger to FreightWave Airwaves, and that is the one and only Matt Mclelland. He is the VP of Sustainability and Innovation over at Covenant. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks. Just a short drive over here. You know, you always give me the option to do it remote.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm right here in Chattanooga. Let me drive 10 minutes down the road. And I love this. I love the face-to-face.
It always adds a little bit more, I think, production value, of course. And then I'm the same way. So I live right across the street. So it's just like...
You're kidding.
I do. It's like a less than a 2-minute walk. I just walk right across the street. So it's like that added production value just for a little bit of a commute. So it's always worth it, and always worth having you here on FreightWaves because you always have a ton of insight. And of course, Net Zero Carbon, something that we couldn't host without having some insights from you. And jumping into it, what is going to be at the top of your mind? We're looking at, of course, of net zero carbon. We're looking at emissions. We're looking at what's going on with sustainability, of course, within the freight network or the freight industry, I should say. What's going to be one of the top things in your mind right now when we're looking at the industry overall?
Gosh, you know, it's dangerous asking me open-ended questions. Right? There's so many ways to start talking about, you know, the first thing that I tell people is that, you know, you have private fleets, which, you know, the people watching today, the fleets watching today, some are private, some are for hire. We're a for-hire fleet. Our needs and goals and objectives are going to be very different than if I'm Pepsi or U.S. Foods or Cisco or FedEx or UPS, these folks that have private fleets that have environmental initiatives that are tied to sustainability plans, which are tied to everything from science-based targets and initiative, ESG goals and objectives. And, you know, they can afford to do whatever they want to do.
Right.
We can only afford to do what our customers are willing to pay for. So often, I think we were talking about this earlier, I'll get a question from somebody, so Matt, what's your sustainability strategy as it relates to getting to net zero, reduction of emissions? And, you know, the answer to that is whatever our customers are willing to pay for. So, you know, for the last couple of years, Anthony, it's been interesting because, you know, a lot of our shippers were just getting their arms around what that meant. And so if I were to sort of rough sketch some sustainability or some numbers with electrification, you show that to somebody next to a diesel quote and they're just going to say, wow, yeah, let me think about that, and you never get a call again.
Right.
For others, now, you know, we're starting to talk to some of the more progressive, you know, shippers that have goals and objectives that, you know, they're really pushing their transportation buyers to be aware of, and they're willing to pay more.
Right.
Now, still not substantially more. You know, we're getting to the point where somebody's not going to bat an eye when I give them a price on what an electrified route is going to run, assuming that the use case and the range and all that fits into place. But yeah, it just depends. I would say, though, to answer your question, we do have some fleet initiatives to reduce idle percentage, always looking to increase miles per gallon. And with those, obviously, comes some carbon reduction. But yeah, in a nutshell, I would say it depends. We do have, we did write a sustainability plan for this year. This is publicly available. You can download it from covenantlogistics.com. But I wrote this section on decarbonization of freight that just kind of talks about our position on it and kind of what we're going to do to start whittling away at that number.
And whittling away at it is something that I think is going to be taken, it seems like a lot of different approaches from different companies, of course, as you just mentioned, but also different states. So we're looking at some different initiatives, different countries. Then you go into the U.S. and you look at some of the different initiatives in different states. Seems like California is one of the most active, and I don't think we can have a conversation about anything net zero carbon or anything that has to do with emissions within the U.S. without talking about California and, of course, CARB.
So, and when you say CARB, it's not just California anymore. There's, at the moment, 16, I believe now it's 17 other states. They're going to follow the CARB initiative. So everything from inventorying in that state to following the same, you know, EPA standards and CARB standards are being adopted. Probably 3 days ago, maybe not 3 days ago because I would have been on Labor Day weekend, but maybe on Friday I could have told you what those 17 states were because I had them right in front of me. But you know, basically, to your point, it's going to be a set of rules and regulations that start on the 1st of next year and will go forward into like 2032 that requires, and you know, we could spend a lot of time pulling up statistics and showing exactly what date, what percentage of the fleet has to be zero emission and inventorying and how the fleets that operate in the drayage ports are going to be different. The expectation is going to be different from those than over the road fleet. fleets like us, $50 million or 50 trucks versus fleets that fall outside of CARB. We could talk a lot about that. And maybe it makes sense to kind of go into some of the details on that. I got to be honest with you, I don't have all of it committed to memory. I brought a couple of cheat sheets here. Yeah. But just broad brushing, we're very, at Covenant, and I can share this on behalf of a lot of the other carriers, because a lot of the carriers that have sustainability initiatives that we do, we're peers, we all talk, and we all are affected by the same CARB initiatives. We're all really excited about playing a role in having a positive effect on the environment by changing our behavior.
Right.
Bridge technologies, which are kind of ways to start making subtle changes starting today, larger changes like zero-emission vehicles, which start kind of coming into play more and more as time goes on. Hydrogen is just starting to kind of get its legs, and stations and some of that is infrastructure starting to be built out. We're all really excited about it, but we're also really sort of a little bit, what's the right word? A little bit cautiously optimistic and pessimistic at the same time.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is right now we're still having California talk about electrification and put all these requirements into place, but there's still parts of the state where you're not allowed to charge your vehicles during certain types of the day, during certain times of the year due to power shortages. There's some large fleets that I believe advertise and have been at your conferences that are sitting on trucks that they can't put into play right now because they can't get permits approved to build charging stations because of the lack of power in the particular densely populated areas they're in. So there's a lot of ways to unpack that. What makes sense to talk about first? That's a really big, California's a really big topic.
So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, when I think of anything government related, from my economist's mind, I always think, okay, whatever the deadline is, double it in length, and of course, whatever the budget is, maybe up it by another 50 to 75%, because all these things are going to need to be interchanged a little bit. But when we're looking at, of course, this situation, it's not that we can keep pushing this further and further down the road. It has to come to a head at some point, and we have to start course correcting at some point in time. And so I think the first thing is, how achievable are some of these deadlines that we're looking at hitting over here?
So it's a great question. I think you phrased it really well. Like you, I'm kind of a numbers person, right? I have a coffee cup on my desk that says, without data, you're just another person with an opinion.
Right.
So, when you think about the leadership of California, you think about the governor, let's start there, right? Gavin Newsom, who, whether you agree with his politics or not, he created this crazy goal of, no gasoline-powered cars after, 2032 or 2034? Maybe it's 2036 now. I think it's changed a few times. That's just not possible.
Yeah.
For too many reasons to list. And again, trying to be optimistic, right? It's just not possible. But I do admire him throwing down the gauntlet and saying, we got to get started somewhere. Right. So I'm going to put this date on the calendar. And I think he has every intention of holding the OEMs to it. But there's just no way they're going to be able to meet that. So, you could say, Matt, what date would you be comfortable with? And I would say, 2032, 2042. It's interesting. Bill Gates wrote this book called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books. I don't always agree with Bill Gates' position on a lot of things, but I do like a lot of what he says in this book about the environment. And in this book, Anthony, he talks about net zero initiatives and how if you set a date on the calendar today, so if you're one of these companies that has a 2030, 2040, 2050 commitment, that roadmap is largely based on technology that has yet to be invented. Because if you were to ask, say, for example, Microsoft, how are you going to be net zero? They're actually pretty progressive. They may be able to show you all the baby steps and things they're taking. By 2030, we want to be here. 2040, we want to be here. And 2050, we want to be there. But if you're Amazon, large shipper, complex network, right, lots of moving parts, massive private fleet, they're probably banking on technology that has yet to be invented. So I'm with you, but, do you double that number?
Yeah.
Do you extend that date by a factor of 2? I wish I had a crystal ball.
Right. And I think the other big aspect that kind of comes to my mind when I'm looking at these initiatives is, okay, I have this initiative, I put this in place, and while I am in charge, so to speak, I I am kind of taking responsibility for the progress or lack thereof. What does accountability look like for some of these companies that have these goals that are set by someone maybe in 2023? All right, this is where we plan to be in 2050, but they're not planning on being there in 2050. So what does that look like? Is that kind of like an open-ended goal? Like you said, just throwing something down and just, getting started, because that's what's most important. The first, first thing is just the first step. So in terms of just accountability, is that do you see as an issue when we're looking at moving forward here?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just talking with one of our, when I say more progressive shippers, just, one of the ones that are really thoughtful, that have put a lot of thought into their sustainability initiatives. It's very authentic. They really believe it. They can talk about it in very nuanced detail. So I was talking to one of these folks that is responsible for sustainability at a macro level. And he's sort of painting this picture of what they want to do and how they want to get there. But then a couple days later, I'm talking to one of the transportation buyers, right, who's talking to us about what sort of things can we do together. And so, recalling this conversation with the top level guy, I'm talking to this person about, okay, well, let's put some numbers down. He said, yeah, that's too expensive. I'm like, well, this guy said that this is really important and y'all need to do that. And what I've learned is that those two groups don't always talk to each other. And so goals and incentives for, let's just call it the chief sustainability officer and the VPs of sustainability, always aren't in line with the people actually making the procurement decisions. Now, this is typically true of very large organizations, but I'm finding a lot of those two things are coming closer together. And so those groups are communicating more. They're being incentivized sometimes on the same thing. So, I'm starting to see that kind of have a little bit of a course correction. Still, at the end of the day, when you're talking about solutions that are 2x better than where we are now just in terms of emissions, it's really expensive. But I got to take a little bit of a sidetrack here and tell you about something that really does kind of bother me with a lot of this, and I almost want to look at the viewer and sort of talk directly with them. Is when you think about the options that are available today to decarbonize an over-the-road 18-wheeler, there's just nothing there that can go for 400, 500 miles, 600 miles a day. In our case, we have a large expedited fleet, 800, 900 miles a day. There's just nothing available. Hydrogen won't get you that far, even if you could get hydrogen, ubiquitously across that route. Electrification doesn't get you that far. So if you're that person, if you're the consumer that I want these things here tomorrow, and it's got to come from the other side of the country, a lot of the expectations that we have don't mesh with the sustainability requirements that we're setting, not just for ourselves, but for the people that we buy and that we buy things from. So, one of the things I tell people, especially when I speak publicly, is that, we're part of the problem. We just can't expect us or our competitors or the intermodal carriers or really FedEx, UPS, Exxon, Shell. We can't expect them to do the work. To some extent, we have to own some of this. Right. So small things that we can do, you don't have to have that Amazon product tomorrow. Right. Certainly not within an hour, right? Remember when that was a thing?
Yes.
I think we're going to have to start to meet these goals, we're going to have to start setting our expectations a little bit differently than we do today. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great point because, like you said, we were talking about the Amazon same-day delivery in some places, or I want this by drone. That was going to be a big thing at one point in time. I don't know if it's still coming to fruition or not, but really that expectation from the consumer. And then once Amazon sets it out, everyone else just kind of follows suit. They just have no other other choice that, hey, Amazon's doing it. We're not quite there yet, but we have to try to find a way to be somewhat competitive. And so I think that's a great point. And the other big thing that I love that you mentioned earlier is some aspects around collaboration and partnerships, because I can only imagine that's a huge part here. Because when I think about the freight industry, of course, this is a business. People are here to make money. They're here to capture market share, continue to build their margins and expand. But at the same time, we're looking at this fragmented industry and this big goal that we have ahead of us. What point does partnerships really kind of play here? Is this something that collaboration is just going to have to be an essential part to really be successful here? Is this something that people are going to have to just kind of wrap their minds around at some point in time?
There definitely is going to have to be collaboration, which is why one of the things I love about my role is I can call the chief sustainability officer at one of the largest fleets in the country and say, hey, I'm trying to protect his name. I've got this thing that I want to experiment with, or I've got somebody that's trying to pitch us on this idea. Have you looked at this? What are your thoughts on this? Is this something that you've invested in? And even as competitors, we can have that conversation together. And eventually we'll get to a point where like, okay, now it's getting weird because, you know, we're competitors and I have to sort of hold some cards close to my chest.
Right.
But that really doesn't happen that often. There's a good friend of mine, you know, who's responsible for all the innovation and future stuff at a large fleet that's 15 times the size of us. And we talk every couple of weeks about, hey, what great thing have you seen since we last talked? And so, yeah, collaboration is a big part of it. You know, rising tide floats all ships. And, you know, in memory of Jimmy Buffett, you know, who unfortunately passed away over the weekend, you know, we're all, you know, we're fishing in the same boat. You know, I can sing the song, but I'm not a very good singer. We're all in the same ocean, fishing in the same boat, you know, in the same ocean. And so collaboration is a big part of how we're going to get there.
I'm excited for the future.
Well, one more thing, even with the OEMs, I'm starting to see the OEMs work together more and more
that's
often.
huge.
You know, I mean, Daimler and Cummins getting together to do a hydrogen-powered truck. You know, these two, they compete against each other in the diesel engine market, but they're working together on this side. So
it's like a different form of transparency that's being brought into the industry. I think this is one for the common good that everyone can kind of get behind. And Matt, in closing, before we get out of here, is there something that you want to reiterate or an answer to a question you wish I had asked or something that you just want to leave our viewers with before we head out here as something that's maybe top of mind or maybe that you want to stick with them?
Yeah, you know, I think just to touch on something I've already mentioned, you know, I think that a lot of the expectations that we have that we try to project onto the people that we're buying goods and services from, we're just going to have to change the way we think about the way we procure things. You know, we just can't always expect it to be here tomorrow. And that's hard, right? Because, you know, here we are in an age of DoorDash and Uber Eats, and I don't want to go anywhere, and I just want to hear quicker. And, you know, we get really frustrated when flights are delayed, and I just think that the expedited world that we live in, which comes at a cost,
right,
a carbon cost, carbon zero, you know, we're just going to have to maybe change those expectations. I'm older than you are. When I grew up in the 70s, my parents would turn off the lights,
right,
you know, and, you know, there was a power sort of shortage at one point. And I think in a world where just more and more of our innovations require electricity, require, you know, this quest that we're on for the flux capacitor, right, renewable electricity at scale, you know, until we figure out what that is, we're going to change our behavior a little bit. That's what I'd leave everyone with.
Well, Matt, I think that's a great piece to leave everyone with. And of course, insightful as always an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah,
thanks for having me. I'll come over here anytime.
Excellent. We'll love to have.
There's a great place to eat down the street. We could have lunch first, then come do this. So
I think we can turn this into a thing. I like
lunch on you, yeah.
Yeah, lunch on me for sure. And thank you all so much for tuning in. That's going to do it for this Fireside Chat, but there's plenty more content coming up, so stay tuned.